Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Mrs. G's Storytime. We are reading the book Twice Freed by Patricia St. John with permission of Christian Focus Publications, and we are on Chapter 11. Onesimus' resolve was made more difficult by the fact that Philemon's friendship with Polemon came to an abrupt end. A few days after the party from Ephesus had arrived, Polemon came over to talk business and inquire about the guilds. Philemon explained that he had not been able to join the guilds. How could he, as a Christian, take part in the feast and eat the food offered to idols and bind himself to brotherhood by sacrificing to gods? He talked to Polemon about Christ, and this very greatly offended the rich merchant. He left the house quickly, saying he desired no hospitality with a lunatic, and would inquire at the Laodicean medical school about a potion for brain fever. But he continued to buy Philemon's wool because it was the best in the valley. All through the hot, fruitful days, Philemon attended to his harvesting, and Epaphras remained in Colossae. Onesimus ran between the threshing floor, the winepress, and the olive yards, and Archippus. But although Archippus longed for his strong young companion more than ever, he did not need him as before. For one thing, he learned to walk with a crutch and was becoming quite independent. And for another, his mother and little Pascasia competed with each other to wait on him hand and foot. Also, he had started to study the Jewish scriptures and was already beginning to take his place as a preacher. Night after night, the work of the day was finished and the dusk had fallen and the people began to arrive. Stealing up from the town and in from the pastures, and a strangely assorted crowd would gather in the atrium. Shepherds, reapers, smelling of the flocks in the fields, tired slaves, women, little children, dignified merchants, and a group of exiled Jews. Among these were two or three keen-eyed rabbis with their Pentateuchs and scrolls of history tucked under their arms. These had been but old stories of dead men and of revered words from the past, until they suddenly discovered Christ blazing out from every parchment. Now, night after night, they pored over them, tracing the signs of his coming, reading the new living interpretations into words that had hitherto been dead. The slaves and the laborers, the mothers, would soon slip out, overcome by sleep and much learning. But Philemon and Epaphras and the rabbi would sometimes continue till the stars paled. There was little opposition at the time. Everyone was too busy getting into the harvest. The rabbis were excommunicated from their synagogues for teaching heresy and consorting with unclean Gentiles, but they felt drawn to unclean Gentiles and did not greatly care. Philemon, highly respected in the town, was left to do as he pleased. But from other cities where Epaphras had preached the gospel and found small churches, there came rumors of persecution and fear of death. "The olives are in," said Epaphras to Philemon as they sat one noonday enjoying the golden autumn sunlight and the harvest stored. "I should like you to come with me on my trip north and encourage and exhort our suffering brethren." "And who will care for the church here?" asked Philemon. Epaphras' gaze rested thoughtfully on Archippus, who was sitting a little while apart, struggling with his longing to go too. "I think, Archippus, you could start to undertake that ministry with the help of the rabbi," he said. "You are young, but the Lord has given you much light." "Me?" Archippus looked up, flushed with the pleasure of the old man's words. "But, Master Epaphras, I know so little yet." "The Holy Spirit shall teach you all things and bring to your remembrance what you have learned," quoted Epaphras. "These were the very words of Jesus, and you have the scriptures. Now take heed to your ministry." He smiled at the amazed boy and turned back to Philemon and Onesimus, clearing away the meal, pricked up his ears. "We will pass by Laodicea," he said, "for the Christians meeting in the house of Epaphras are mostly rich, prosperous, and respected, and seem to need no help. In Hierapolis, they are grounded firmly in the faith. In Philadelphia, they stand fast, but in Sardis, they are in danger of being defiled. The streets of that city flow with gold and the vice and loose living and shame that prevail to the unbelievable. I pray God they will keep their garments white. In Thyatira, they have been excluded from the trade guilds and are in deep poverty. But in Pergamos and Smyrna, where Caesar is worshipped and the sacrifice to Nero is compulsory, they are in daily danger of losing their lives. Yes, I must be off. I shall like to start tomorrow at daybreak." So the next day the two men started off together, down the valley, staves in hand and their bundles on their back, without slaves or attendants. Aphia and Archippus took over the direction of the household. Onesimus in the meantime began to scheme and plan for a day's escape at whatever cost, when suddenly fate played into his hands. Pericasia had been playing out in the field, picking berries in the hedges, and had rubbed her eyes with some poisonous juice. She came in crying, her eyes sore and inflamed, and by evening she could hardly see. Aphia was deeply anxious. "Hermas must go to Laodicea early tomorrow morning," he said, "and bring some of the Laodicean salve. Go and tell him to start before daybreak, Onesimus, and give him the money." Onesimus stopped outside the house to consider. He had wild thoughts of attacking Hermas, tripping him up or knocking him senseless, but after a moment or two he decided that persuasion was better than force. He darted home and took the smallest of his precious coins from the hiding place and sought out Hermas, who was busy cleaning the stables. "Hermas," he began, holding out a coin, "look what I will give you to be ill tomorrow." Hermas stared at him. His rather stupid mouth fell open, and then he stared at the coin. "Where did you get that from?" he asked suspiciously. "Never you mind. I earned it in Ephesus. I will buy you a basin of honey to make you fatter, Hermas. But you've got to be too ill to go to Laodicea tomorrow. I want to go instead." Hermas stared doubtfully at the impetuous young cockatiel, hopping about, impatient at the old man's stupidity. Hermas was fat and lazy, hated being sent to Laodicea. Besides, he had not possessed a coin for years. But he was not sure he knew how to be ill, for he had never been ill in his life. "Scream, Hermas," urged Onesimus. "Vomit. Say you're overeaten and groan as loud as you can. They'll all believe that. By the time they discover the truth, I shall be halfway down the hill." "And I shall be beaten," muttered Hermas. The sight of the coin was so attractive, and the prospect of 20-mile walk so unattractive, they agreed to the plan without much more ado. Besides, he suddenly remembered that Philemon was away and Aphia disliked beatings. Onesimus took no chances. He started off in the dark long before sunrise, while the household was still asleep, merely leaving a message that Hermas had been very ill in the night, and he, Onesimus, had gone instead. He could hardly believe his good fortune as he dipped down over the edge of the first plain and the farm disappeared from view. He was safe and away, and no one could stop him now. He leapt and sang like a young mad thing. For was he not free for a whole day, and was he not going to see the child of the canyons? In his elation he never even considered the possibility of failure or the extreme unlikelihood of a slave managing to speak to a high-born, carefully guarded little girl like Irina. Nothing could fail today. The sun rose as he crossed the lower plateau, but the season of burning heat was over, and the rays warmed and cheered him. All around him were golds and silvers, deep gold poplars and walnut trees, and pale gold empty cornfields with their subtle and baked earth. Silver is stripped olive trees, and the silver in the sunlight and the river below him. The mile seemed to be rolling away, and it was still fresh morning when he reached the gates of Laodicea and passed inside its fortifications. It seemed to him an enormous, magnificent city, almost as equal as Ephesus. And certainly Laodicea was a fine city. Destroyed by an earthquake 40 years before, it had been rebuilt in a modern style with wide streets, 3 fine new theaters, and a gymnasium. It was the seat of all banking arrangements of Asia, and notoriously wealthy, for it was also the center of wool industry, and the clothes and fabric woven in the Laodicean factories were exported all over the empire. Onesimus went straight to the apothecary, who lived in the shadow of the great medical school, and bought a box of the Typhophagia, the world-famous eye powder of Laodicea. Then, his errand accomplished, he started off to find Irina's home. This was not difficult. The weavers in the cloth factories all knew Polemon, and one pointed out his great marble mansions up on the hill by the Hierapolis gate. Only when he reached the outer portals and saw the beautiful house enclosed in the arch of a garden did he begin to realize how foolish he had been to imagine he could ever reach her. But he could not, he would not give up. If he could just get a little nearer to the house. A bold idea struck him, and he marched up to the door with his head held high. Master Philemon of Colossae sends greetings to Master Polemon of Laodicea, he announced firmly to the slave at the portal, and begs to inform him that the next bale of wool will soon be dispatched. He would also have news of his health and the health of his daughter, the mistress Irina. Tell him, said the slave, that Master Polemon has ridden to Thyatira to buy purple dye, and he will be back in 2 days' time. He and his daughter both prosper and are in good health. Well, there is nothing to do now but to turn around and go away. But if Polemon was not home, he would take his time. He wandered slowly towards the gate, looking back over his shoulder at the great house. And then suddenly he glanced towards the garden. He saw her, crouching on the ground under a mulberry tree, gathering mulberries into a basket. As before, he saw her a full minute before she saw him, and he noticed that she had changed a little. She was still slender, although probably taller. Her dark hair still fell loose about her face and shoulders. But there was a grave, lonely air about her, and she stood up to reach the great twisted bough, and she looked strangely small and fragile. All his shyness left him, and he threw caution to the winds and sped over the grass towards her. She looked up quickly, and all her gravity disappeared. She knew him instantly. Her face dimpled into a delightful smile. "Have you not forgotten me, Mistress Irina?" he asked her. How could she ever forget him? Had he not been the hero of one and only adventure she had ever had in her dull, lonely little life? Since the death of her mother, the days had also been exactly alike. The correct program of meals, lessons, embroidery, and a well-protected walk or an hour's play in the garden. But at night, when she lay in bed and had bidden her correct nurse a correct good night, and had said what she expected to say to her father, her thoughts would fly back to the canyon at Colossae. And half asleep and half awake, she would go climbing on with the boy to where flowers of unimaginable beauty bent their heads to bright streams. Sometimes the path was too steep for her, or the boulders too high. Then the boy would give her his hand and help her, and it was always more beautiful further on. They never got to the top, not even in her dreams, but one day together they would look over the other side. So she studied and did as she was told and stayed where she should, and everyone called her a good, obedient little maid. But her spirit lived in another country where the streams were cold and the rivers high and the snows not far away. No one ever followed her there except the boy who was always with her. And here he was again. She was not dreaming. He was taller and thinner, his face a little more angular, but not really changed. He was looking at her in just the same way, with the same merry light of adventure in his eyes. To her it did not matter at all that he was a slave, but she knew that other people did not share her opinions, and she looked anxiously towards the house. "Come to the herb garden," she said quickly, taking his hand just as she had taken in the canyon. "Down there, behind the cypress tree, no one can see us, and if my governess comes, you can just get behind the bushes." They sat down together among the sweet-smelling herbs and shrubs, where the sun was hot and golden. The bees hummed in and out of the bushes, smiling delightfully at each other. "Do you remember that deep pool where you found me?" she asked, as though it had happened yesterday. "And do you remember how cross my nurse was? My father sent her away because she let me get lost, and I was glad, because she was never kind to me. Now I have a governess, and that's much better. She does not care much what I do, as long as I finish my lessons and stay in the garden." "I have hoped that you would come over to Colossae again," said Onesimus, "and we might have escaped from up to the canyon. Do you remember how the slave of yours hit me? It was well worth it." "We shall not come again," said Irina, suddenly grown grave and thoughtful. "My father would not take me the last time he went, because I had run away that day, and he came back very angry indeed. He said your master has become a Christian, and he thought he must have lost his senses. I heard him telling Master Paulinus, his chief weaver, about it. Onesimus, have you become a Christian? Are you all Christians?" "Not I," said Onesimus. "I want nothing to do with it. It seems like a weak sort of religion to me, forgiving your enemies and being content with your lot. I want to fight and revenge wrong. I want to save up and be a free man when I am older." His eyes were flashing, and she looked at him, puzzled. And then she said hesitantly, "But it makes people so kind. My father does not know, but we have an old shepherd who is a Christian. He worships with the people who collect in Master Nympha's house. He and his wife live in a cottage not far from the Syrian gates, where the pastures slope down to the river, and he tends my father's flocks. Sometimes on my walks with Claudia, my slave, we go there. Claudia likes to look at the shops, so she leaves me in the cottage with the Ephraim and Antonia. They are different from other people. They are so kind. Antonia tells me stories about their God, Christ, how he touched a terrible leopard and healed him, and took a little dead girl by the hand, and she lived, and called the children to him when everyone else was bidding them begone. Irina, said Onesimus, half teasing, I believe you're almost a Christian yourself. No, said Irina slowly, my father would not allow me to be one. He would be angry if I ever spoke of it. And yet, when I hear about this Christ, sometimes I feel I love him. Did Aramis or Siban, our own God of healing, Archelaus, ever say, let the children come to me? I think only Christ ever said that. The bright color had flooded her cheeks as she spoke, for she had never told anyone else these thoughts, and Onesimus knew she was showing him her innermost longing heart. He sat very still, hardly daring to move or speak, lest he should spoil this clear moment of truth and perfect understanding. If it lasted, perhaps he too would show her all that was in his heart. Mistress Irina! Mistress Irina! She jumped up and peered over the bushes, and she crouched low, and then she turned back. It's all right, she said. Claudia is walking the other way. She will not come here, but I must go. Wait till I am in the house, and then you can run behind those cypress trees to the gate. You can slip out quite easily. Then she hesitated. How do you say goodbye to the boy who was always there in your own country at the top of the canyons? Suddenly the light of a happy memory broke across her face. We shall meet again, she said. Do you remember? We said that last time, and we have. Of course I remember, said Onesimus. How could I ever forget? Ye gods, wasn't your nurse cross? They both laughed, and she tossed back her hair and turned to run across the lawn. Peace, peace, little Mistress Irina, he called softly after her. One day we shall most certainly meet again. And tomorrow we'll be reading chapter 12. Thank you for coming and listening to this story. It's really a precious story. I love Patricia St. John's books. I love you, and I'm praying for you, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.